Well, you've heard about energy. Most of you don't think of energy, you think of gasoline, but that's the big issue in the election this year. And America is their dependence on foreign oil. But our next guest says it's time for America to drill for its own oil until it can become energy independent. Newt Gingrich's latest book is called Drill Here, Drill Now, Pay Less. Newt, always a pleasure to welcome you to the 700 Club. Thanks, good friend.
It's great to be with you, and I appreciate this chance to talk about energy. It's such an important topic. The Callista and I released a movie last Saturday to go along with the book. The movie's called We Have the Power. And the point of both the book and the movie is that we have more energy than any other country in the world. And yet our government, our politicians, are blocking us from the very solutions that would make it possible for us to ignore Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or Russia or Iran and produce plenty of energy right here at home.
You've served as Speaker of the House of Representatives. How come? Why are our politicians doing this?
Well, I think you have to realize that on the left, people like Speaker Pelosi from San Francisco and Senator Harry Reid, they really represent a view that wants to punish Americans into smaller and smaller cars, into less and less use of oil. They really are deeply opposed to drilling. And if you read people like Tom Friedman in the New York Times, they really think that the only answer is to get away from oil and gas. And they bought two things. They bought an intellectual model that's wrong called peak oil, which is simply factually not true. There is a great deal of natural gas and oil available on the planet. We have 3 times as much oil in the Rocky Mountains in oil shale as there is in Saudi Arabia. We have 27% of the world's coal, the largest supply in the world by a big margin. We have new discoveries of natural gas that are extraordinary. We have at least 120 years supply of natural gas in the United States. But we also have solar power and wind power and hydrogen and nuclear power and all sorts of ethanol and other biofuels. The fact is, what you've had is an anti-energy psychology that is basically against Americans having big cars, driving long distances, having big houses. And these people would like to force all of us to move into inner cities, ride public transit, and have small places to live. It's an ideological war against the core of American values, and they've dominated our government and they've dominated our courts for most of the last 50 years.
Dude, just talk about oil shale. You pointed out there might be as much as 1 trillion barrels of oil in the various Rocky Mountain shale formations. Now, why can't we get to that? Is that they public lands?
Look, the Congress blocked it. We started Drill Here, Drill Now, Pay Less as a petition drive at AmericanSolutions.com. And almost 1,500,000 people signed up. And for the first time in 27 years, the congressional ban, let's be clear, it's a congressional ban. It's the Congress that did this. The congressional ban on looking for oil in American water has stopped temporarily, although the Democratic majority leader in the House has already announced that if they win the election, they're going to come back and try to reimpose it.
Well, but that's not the oil shale. I mean, that's offshore drilling.
But the same was done in the House. Yeah. Congressman Udall of Colorado proposed a year ago a ban on blocking all public lands from being used for oil shale. And so there's a congressional ban on using oil shale in the Rockies, which has not yet been lifted, just as there was a congressional ban on trying to drill offshore.
Well, we are helpless before the Russians. The Russians are doing everything to gain dominance. Just this little adventure in Georgia locked up another pipeline. And the Saudis are just rolling in American dollars. What's wrong with these people, the Congress?
Well, I think there's a professional political class and an elite news media and a large part of the academic world that all form a left-wing worldview in which they don't want America to be the dominant country in the world. They don't want us to be the leading power. They don't want Americans to have the best quality of life. I can't explain it any other way. The fact is, when we send $500 to $700 billion a year to Venezuela, to Iran, to Saudi Arabia, to Russia, we strengthen our enemies, we weaken ourselves. I'd much rather see us building new buildings in St. Louis with energy money than building them in Dubai. If you look at all the construction in Dubai, all of it's being paid for by Western countries buying energy, which we ought to be producing here at home, and from ethanol to oil to coal to natural gas to solar and wind to hydrogen to nuclear. We have the ability to produce that here at home. That's why both in our movie We Have the Power and in our book, Drill Here, Drill Now, Pay Less, we lay out the case. I don't think any reasonable person can doubt that if America wanted to have abundant energy at low cost, we could do it. But our government and our politicians are standing in the way of doing that.
Well, I certainly know the environmentalists have blocked the construction of many oil refineries. They hate refineries, and we haven't had one since Jimmy Carter. So right now in the Southeast, they're running out of gasoline because we lack refining capacity.
That's right, and we ought to have people pointing out in Atlanta, in Chattanooga, in Nashville, and Charlotte, that the reason they have an energy problem is because you've had left-wing congressional rules on taxes, on litigation, on regulation that have blocked us from building new refineries now since the 1970s, as you pointed out. And the result is today, it took one hurricane hitting the right point of refineries and pipelines to deprive those states of an adequate supply of gasoline. And for people in those states, I was just in Atlanta Saturday, listen, it is a big mess. It is very irritating. And let's be clear, it is the fault of the government policies that made it happen.
Well, another fault that you pointed out in a separate article has to do with this insane mark-to-market accounting, which is bringing down banks and financial institutions. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm actually glad that after weeks and weeks of pounding on the table, we actually got the Securities and Exchange Commission 2 nights ago to back down and open it up. What they were doing, they'd adopted a very, very strict rule, and this is typical of Washington. They overreacted to the Enron scandal. And instead of accepting the fact that the people who broke the law were going to go to jail, they passed a very destructive bill called Sarbanes-Oxley, which has crippled the development of new business. And in that process, they imposed a very rigid accounting process, which is called mark-to-market. And what it says is, if you're a bank and you have 1,000 pieces of property, and you sell one of them at below their previous value, you have to revalue all of the other properties you have to the new value. And that's what they mean by mark the old properties to the new market value. The result is when you have a declining economy, you are constantly squeezing every single financial institution because as prices go down, even a property that's doing perfectly fine, it's paying its mortgage every month, it's perfectly healthy, there's nothing wrong with it, you're not going to sell it. You have to mark it as though you're going to sell it today. There was an estimate by 2 Chicago economists that 70% of the current problem, $500 billion of Secretary Paulson's $700 billion bailout, comes from this mark-to-market. I was really hammering away at this. I gave a speech at the National Press Club Tuesday morning, and I'm delighted that late Tuesday afternoon, the Securities and Exchange Commission finally relented, and they've opened up the alternative of marking to the value of cash flow, which is an equally valid and much healthier way to do it in this kind of market. So I'm hoping in the next week you're going to see a substantial reduction in pressure on businesses who have been artificially pressured by a U.S. government accounting rule to basically go bankrupt.
You call this death by bean counters. It is just unbelievable. You know, the banks really don't have a financial problem except one that's self-imposed by the SEC and the accounting profession.
Right. Almost every big institution that got in trouble was in trouble on accounting. It was not in trouble on cash flow. It had plenty of cash flow, and historically it would have worked its way out. And in fact, the man who was the head of the FDIC under Ronald Reagan made the point that if we had had that accounting rule in the Reagan years, we would have nationalized every single major bank in the country. And he thinks it is crazy. I'm glad to see that the Securities and Exchange Commission took the right step months too late, but I do think you'll see it helping dramatically in the next few weeks, making the economy work better.
Last question. Do you think the American people, who are very resourceful, will ever kick out this bunch of rascals and get some sense in?
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen this year because of the challenge of the Bush administration having weakened the Republican brand so much. But I do believe in the next 2 to 8 years, you're going to see a fundamental rebellion at the grassroots, not just a partisan rebellion, but among Democrats, Republicans, and independents, I think you're going to see a tripartisan movement that says we're sick and tired of government that doesn't work. We're sick and tired of predatory politicians. We're sick and tired of the bureaucracy and the litigation and the corruption, and we want a clean house. And I think you could see something almost like the progressive movement in the last century or the Jacksonians in the 18th, 19th century, just fundamentally sweeping out the old order.
Well, I hope we've got time for that broom to come through. But Newt, thank you for your book. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, Drill Here, Drill Now, Pay Less. His provocative new book published by Regnery. You can get it where books are sold, or we may have it here at cbn.com.
Excellent. Very interesting. Yeah.